It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We've been discussing local elections, and that includes how last night Detroit made history. For the first time, a woman is leading the city.
Our city adds another chapter to its great history. Throughout Detroit's 324-year history, 75 mayors have led this city. Not one has been a woman. But tonight, Detroit, we know that changes. And you changed it, Detroit.
Mary Sheffield is a 38-year-old Black woman who was previously the Detroit City Council president. But becoming mayor, she'll have a much brighter spotlight flashing on her. And many agree that that light, because of her gender, will carry scrutiny that Mayor Mike Duggan never had to face. Notably, Detroit already has many women leading organizations and departments across the city. So how significant is Sheffield's win? And what kinds of things might she need to be concerned about that a man wouldn't? To discuss all this now, we have Raquel Castaneda Lopez here. Raquel served on Detroit City Council at the same time as Sheffield. Now she runs an organization called Restorative Democracy, which supports women of color who hold public office. Raquel, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk about the significance of the city electing its first woman mayor, if we could.
Yeah, first, I just want to say I was so excited. I'm not a late night person, and I stayed up to see the results. And it just was so beautiful having been elected. Mary and I were both first in our own right when we first got elected back in 2013. And just to see her journey this past 12 years has just been really beautiful and inspiring to see her evolve and grow into the leader she is today. And I think for the city, this is historic for all the little brown and Black girls, she mentioned this in her speech, of just seeing that representation and creating that opportunity that this is something that you can achieve. And I think for the city where we are now, it's so important to have a new voice, a fresh face, and just what comes with women in leadership. We know in general, women tend to introduce policies and programs that benefit the general good and really help drive our economy forward. So when she talked about coordinating with schools for transportation and really centering quality of life issues versus just like the creation of jobs, which is important, right? But not the only piece. It was just great to hear that. And I'm excited for what her term brings for the city.
So Mayor Duggan, who was very focused on business and was a great coalition builder, he set part of the foundation, it sounds like. And now Mary Sheffield can take things in a direction that are really focused on the well-being of Detroiters as you see it.
Yes, 100%. I think when we first got elected, again, it was during bankruptcy. We were under emergency management. It was a very difficult transition, right? And so I think in a way, Duggan didn't have it easy per se, but he kind of had a clean slate. The debt was wiped out. He had an emergency manager to push forth things without, the same amount of pushback from council. And so I think Sheffield is coming in when federal funding is being shifted away, but she's no stranger to that challenge of being in an economically strapped city. And so, again, I know World Economic Forum actually just put out an article earlier this year in March that talks about why we need to elect more women to public office. And it's because when they're elected, again, they focus on things like childcare and transportation and affordable housing, which are amazing and needed. And people see those often as like female-based issues, but really they're tied to our economy. Forgive me. And so when you have reliable transportation, when families have reliable and affordable childcare, they're able to show up to work. They're able to open up small businesses. And so I feel like that's the vision she's going to bring to the city. And I'm really excited to see, again, how she focuses on broader quality of life issues and not just bringing businesses to the city of Detroit.
So, in other words, what some believe to be so-called women's issues are everyone's issues.
100%, 100%. And again, we know across the board when women are elected, regardless of their political party, they tend to champion those policies and programs.
Raquel, how much do you think it matters for national politics that Detroit has a woman mayor? How might it affect things outside of Detroit and Michigan?
Yeah, I think last night we saw historic races in Virginia and New Jersey, right, electing the first female governors. And so I think every time another woman is elected, and while it's sad that there's still so many firsts that need to happen, it puts another coin in the other side of the scale, so to speak, right? It creates opportunity and possibility for folks who didn't see that as an opportunity before. And so I think at the national level, especially post Trump's first election in 2016, we saw more programs pop up to recruit women to run for office. I think the challenge that we're seeing now is that oftentimes women, especially at the local level, don't pursue reelection or run for higher office because of the harassment, because of the constant, expectations, relentless pressure from all the forces that be, that we're seeing more programs pop up, and my organization specifically, to support folks after they win. And so we're seeing a national trend of recruiting more women to run for office. And I believe we need to see more support for folks once they actually get into those positions. And so nationally, again, you're seeing whether maybe more at the local level, people at school boards, people in county commission, mayor, city council, et cetera, which is beautiful. But that won't be sustained if we don't truly support them once they cross that initial finish line.
What does that support look like after they cross the finish line?
For me, and one of the reasons I decided not to pursue re-election and to found restorative democracy is once you get elected, this seems crazy, but there's no official training per se, right? You may have an orientation with your political party. You may go to an annual conference with an organization, but there's really not a comprehensive training or long-term kind of coaching or mentoring. You get elected, and day one, you're expected to be an expert and know everything. It doesn't matter what your track record is.
Probably like being a parent.
100%, right? Like day one, you're an expert. You have to know everything, fix everything. You have all the powers in the world, regardless of what level of government you're serving in. And for women, those expectations are even more relentless, right? Yeah. You're scrutinized for your appearance. You're scrutinized, as we saw with Mayor-elect Sheffield, for your personal relationships. You're scrutinized for your emotional response and how you handle things. You're held to higher standards and different standards than your male counterparts. And that ultimately takes a toll over time, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And if we want to really transform our democracy, we need to have sustained support and safe spaces where these women can put down their armor, show up as their authentic selves, and, teach them the nitty gritty, like the tactical skills of like civic engagement and strategy and all of those things, but also the emotional resiliency to be able to navigate those really hard conversations and ultimately these toxic institutions that weren't built for people like us.
This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Raquel Castaneda Lopez. She runs an organization called Restorative Democracy. It supports women of color who hold public office. We're discussing the significance of Detroit having its first woman mayor, Mary Sheffield. I want to go back to what you were saying, Raquel, about the ways that we scrutinize women who are in office as a society. I mean, when it comes to what they wear and who they surround themselves with, their emotional reaction to things that you've mentioned these things. Why do we do that? And how do we interrogate our tendencies to do that more?
Yeah, I mean, I think culturally, unfortunately, women, you're raised to be a caretaker and to kind of provide for everyone. And at the same time, you're not given the same value or opportunities to have a true seat at the table. And so it's kind of this piece of, having these really high expectations and standards and being expected to care for all and you really provide support. And at the same time, being viewed as not as qualified or not as resilient, whatever it is. And I mean, ultimately, I think it's rooted in like the patriarchy and white supremacy, but how it plays out in regular everyday society, because it comes from, other women as well, and it comes from people of color. But disproportionately, women, and especially women of color in leadership roles, face greater scrutiny, face a greater levels of harassment and threats. There was a report put out by BDI earlier this year that says, I believe it was 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 leaders in public office at the local level face this type of harassment based on their gender and their racial identity. And so for me, it's kind of like something that's so culturally ingrained that we don't even question it. I know when I was in elected office, you would get touched so often without, permission being asked, whether it was grabbing your hand, rubbing your back, an arm being wrapped around your waist. And it was just the expectation as a woman that you were there to be touched, and that was acceptable. And if you question it, there was pushback from men and from women like this. You should want this. People are showing affect, that they like you, right? And you should want to be liked in your role, even if you are the mayor of the city of Detroit or whatever other municipality. And so I think it's so ingrained that a lot of times people aren't conscious of it or aware. And as a woman and leader, you can't show weakness, right? So if someone is, maybe wrapping their arm around your waist and you feel uncomfortable, you kind of have to just take it. Otherwise, you're seen as being weak. You're seen as not being fit for that role, that you can't handle it, you can't take it. And so, in terms of like support, that may seem very small and very minuscule, but having support to kind of just share these microaggressions and these experiences to, again, put down your armor and have a safe, supportive community is so rare when you're in public office, because especially, again, as a woman, you have to be on all of the time because eyes are watching you, and any small mistake that you make goes unforgiven. Whereas we see, for example, with Mayor Duggan, committed adultery, had some shady contract deals. And those things maybe were headlines in the news for a month or so, but were lost, right? And even as he runs for governor, we're not seeing those same type of personal attacks on him as a white man. Yet when Sheffield ran just for mayor, we saw her personal relationships drudged up in this campaign.
Raquel, I want to go back to the notion that women have a really big role to play here in supporting each other, because something I've talked about with other women is that sometimes we're the ones holding each other back the most. I think about the camaraderie among men.
Yeah.
The support that I see. It's like often unwavering brotherliness. And I don't always see that among women. Instead, unfortunately, sometimes we see each other as competition. Can you speak to that and the need for women to really step up and not be participants in some of the things that we're talking about here?
Yeah, again, I don't think it's with malintention per se. I think it's part of a byproduct of the system. If the system was built for men, by men, right? And when you're a man, whether you're a man of color or not, you get welcomed to this old boys club. You get invited to the football games. You get sample resolutions, ordinances, et cetera, et cetera. You get this kind of social and community support that if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, you're progressive, you're different, you're new, you don't. You're kind of isolated and then actively attacked. And that may come, as you said, from men as well as from other women that you would assume would be allies. And I think that comes from this kind of scarcity approach, right? Like, okay, there's only one seat at the table for a woman, so we have to be cutthroat and fight for that, right? Or I need to be relentless in my perfectionism and knowing it all. And so I can't, create space or room to have an ally here as another woman, because that may be viewed as weakness. Or even in my situation, I mean, Mary and I were in council for 8 years together, and it took time for our relationship to grow and to build over those 8 years, because people viewed it as like, oh, you're only allying with other women. So even if you do show up to support each other, it's viewed negatively as like, well, why are you only working with other women in this space? And so it's regardless of whether you show up supportive or in opposition, there's still some level of scrutiny that men don't receive. And I think it's simply the strategy of divide and conquer, right? Yeah. If you undermine, you isolate, you exhaust, those are all tools of oppression, and that keeps these women leaders from reaching their full potential and introducing the really transformative policies that they have in their minds. So in other words, women have a lot of power if they come together. Yes, 100% we do.
During Mayor Sheffield's term, there are going to be moments when criticism of her raises a difficult question, and that is, Are we seeing genuine accountability for her decisions, or are gender biases shaping how we judge her performance? Raquel, how can people discern when sexism is influencing perceptions versus when the criticism is truly warranted?
I think for me, it goes back to values and really staying rooted in our values and analyzing policy and programs from that standpoint. So, for example, Mary has talked a lot about, every Detroiter having a seat at the table. So analyzing policies from that lens is, the Northeast Side being included in conversations, our neighborhoods in Southwest Detroit being included in conversations around development, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So looking at the policies and programs she's presented from a values-based lens, I think will help give some level of objectivity versus, and a good check on yourself if you're being biased is, are you analyzing this based on her personality, based on her relationships with people, based on how she sounds or what she looks like, things that are much more subjective and tied to her personal identity? So I think that for me is a quick check, kind of, is this based on who she is as a person, or is this based on like my values and my vision for policy and programs that I want to see implemented?
We constantly have to interrogate ourselves when it comes to how we are responding to women in politics because of the way many of us have been conditioned. It has me wondering, for new mayors specifically, what kinds of advice, what kinds of things do you tell them with your organization, Restorative Democracy?
Sure. One of the initial trainings we do with everyone really is about going back to their core values. Because when you get elected to office, again, you're expected to be an expert in everything and to fix everything. And it's so easy to fall in this trap of becoming reactionary and just responding to every fire that comes to the table. But that, too, is a strategy to distract you by all these different fires so that you lose focus on what's really important and who you are. So we always go back to centering what your core values are as a person. And that really gets at who they are as individual people. So my advice is always, let's talk about your core values. How do they guide you, and how they continue to show up now in this new role? It's just a new title, but it doesn't mean that title has to transform you and make you lose sight of who you are as a person. So values are really, really key. Brene Brown also talks about values being the foundation for courage and vulnerability. And so for me, that's the foundation of a lot of our work. And I also, Sheffield, we haven't talked yet, but we'll hopefully soon. And I would just want to say to her, be true to yourself and stay true to who you are. Because I remember when she was elected and she was 26 and I was the first Latina and she was the youngest and there was all these expectations. It was council by district. And I saw the fight in her of for justice and equity and wanting to truly give people a voice. And you could see the outside pressures and expectations of her being a Sheffield and being, the daughter of her father and her grandfather and having this legacy to carry. And I think she's done a great job at staying true to her values and balancing those expectations. So I think for all women in office is stay true to your values, stay true to who you are, and to create a really supportive squad, so to speak, right? To protect you, that has your back. They're there for you 100%, to help drown out the noise of all the expectations from other people who are going to try to control you and impact you.
Raquel, your perspective is so valuable given you were a woman in politics, in the fray. I wonder if I could ask you to be very candid for a moment and tell me, how did being in politics, serving on the Detroit City Council, change you for the better? And I don't want to say for the worse, but what was the good and what was the bad?
Yeah, no, I am in a very different place than I was when I left City Council. And I think sometimes we like to frame things in black or white. This was either good or it was bad, but it really is about the gray and the nuance between. So City Council, it was one of the biggest honors of my life, and it was truly transformational. And so in the hardest moments when my house was put on, Fox News and we were poverty shamed, those were really traumatizing moments. And at the same time, led me to deep, profound healing, to own that part of my story, to reclaim parts of my identity that I had been shamed for so much of my life. And so had you asked me 4 years ago, I probably would be in tears talking about this. But I truly believe that when we're given what we can handle, and when you're able to take time to pause, rest, reflect, and truly heal, and to show up vulnerably, that you're able to transcend and level up to whatever's next in your life. And so for me, City Council was this very public, beautiful kind of transformational healing process that I learned so much about myself, learned so much about just the power of community and connection and collaboration and the resiliency of Detroiters. And that work really guides me today, because what I'm doing is still controversial, right? Like supporting women of color in public office. People are always like, well, what about men? And why not all women, et cetera, et cetera. And so we focus on women who are values aligned. So if you're a man and you're down with our mission, you can participate in our program. If you're an ally, you can participate in our programming. And so for me, that journey through City Council created kind of the space and capacity for me to build even greater resiliency to now, do the work that I do at Restorative Democracy. And so it is hard, the public aspect. I mean, I would be in public office again if it wasn't for the public aspect. I love the work itself. Did I want to go and be on camera all the time and have people come to my house? No. So if there was a more behind the scenes role, I would definitely be down. But I think for so many women, we step up to serve our communities, right? We want to help transform people's lives. We're not doing it for the title, for the ego, for the fame, for the recognition. It's to truly give back and make things better and easier for people in your community and ultimately who you were as a younger person.
I want to end on the notion of representation. I know that is a huge part of why you do the work that you do. And you mentioned this earlier, how Mary Sheffield's election could potentially be transformative for other girls and women here in the city of Detroit, specifically for Black and brown girls and women. Can you talk about that in the last minute that we have here?
Sure. I think when you don't see yourself in spaces, you don't realize that things are possible. I mean, when I ran for office, I didn't know I was even going to become the first Latina. And so it didn't seem possible. And so many people told me it wasn't possible. I'm not even 5 feet. I grew up in poverty. I was not a typical politician. But when I ran and then would go visit schools and talk to other people, moments that touched me so often were folks that like, we see ourselves in you. Your family reminds me of our family. And they weren't all Latino. They were, African-American, Yemeni, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, but your story resonates with mine. And I think that's the same for Sheffield, is you have this young woman who started in politics very young in her early 20s and has kind of continued over a decade to grow and evolve, and now she's our mayor. And I think all the little girls, Mary has great events with kids over the years. I think all those kids that she visited in her past 12 years of service are now looking and saying like, wow, we know her. We can do that too. That's possible. And that really is beautiful.
Raquel Castaneda Lopez is the founder of Restorative Democracy. Raquel, thank you for joining me on the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Metro on WDET. Coming up, Michigan promised voting would be easier for everyone, but was it? We'll ask how accessible this election really was for Metro Detroiters with physical disabilities. That's next on the Metro. Stay with us.